On the 4th of October, 1901, the town of Tunxbury in the hill country of Litchfield County, Connecticut, voted 61-9 against buying 8 cords of firewood from a widow who lived 2.5 miles up Corbin Hill. And that vote is still written in the town book in the clerk's round upright hand, and beside it, in the same hand, is the only joke ever set down in the minutes of that town. The article was about fuel. 4 district schoolhouses, the town farm, and the little brick lockup behind the grange all had to be kept warm from the 1st of November to the middle of April, and for 9 years running the town had bought that warmth as anthracite coal by the ton off the siding at the depot from Orrin Shand, who kept the coal shed and owned the only wagon scales in the township. Almeda Trescott stood up at the back of the hall and offered the town 8 cords of seasoned rock maple and white oak, split to stove length and delivered to the schoolhouse doors at $4.25 the cord. Dwight Petties did not stand up to answer her. Petties milked 42 cows on the good flat ground down at Sallow Brook and shipped his milk to New York on the morning train. And he was the kind of man who says the thing everybody is thinking and then lets everybody else be embarrassed about it. He said it from the bench, sitting down, loud enough for the whole hall. "Boys," he said, "let the poor woman alone. She is not farming wood. She is farming smoke." The hall laughed. It laughed the way a room laughs when a joke is both cruel and accurate, which is to say, it laughed longer than it meant to. And then it went quiet and got on with the article, and the town clerk, a dry man named Ambrose Kittredge, who had been clerk for 22 years and who did not ordinarily record anything that was not a motion, wrote the sentence down. The vote was 61-9. The town bought its coal. Almeda Trescott was 59 years old that autumn. She was a short woman and heavy through the shoulders and arms in the way of a woman who has swung a maul since she was 12, with dark iron-gray hair pinned in a hard flat coil at the back of her head, and a broad square face burnt brown to the collar and lined deep at the corners of the mouth. She had level dark brown eyes, and she looked at people a beat longer than most people care to be looked at. She wore a brown and black checked calico work dress with the sleeves buttoned tight at the wrists in every weather, a long bib apron of coarse gray linen with the hem scorched brown in 3 places, heavy men's boots laced high, and a man's shapeless dark felt hat that had been her father's. She walked down Corbin Hill after the meeting because she had walked up it, and it was 2.5 miles, and it was dark, and she did not ask anybody for a ride, and nobody offered. 11 months and 2 weeks later, the same town, through the same selectman, bought 31 cords of firewood from that woman at $9.50 the cord, and was glad to get it. To understand how a town gets to a 61-9 vote, you have to understand what had happened to heat in New England in the 30 years before that evening, because it happened everywhere at once, and it happened for good reasons, and by 1901 almost nobody could remember it happening at all. When Almeda Fenn was a girl on Corbin Hill in the 1850s, the hills of northwestern Connecticut ran on charcoal. There were blast furnaces in that corner of the state, making some of the best iron in America out of local ore, and every one of them burned charcoal, and charcoal is made of wood, and the wood came off the hills in a rotation that had been running since before the Revolution. The furnace at Wheelock, 6 miles down the valley, ate about 6,000 cords a year, and to feed it there were colliers in every hill town, men who cut the sprout wood and stood it up in great round mounds and covered them with leaves and earth and burned them slow for a week without ever letting them catch fire. Her father was one of them. Ezra Fenn burned charcoal for Wheelock Furnace for 41 years, and Almeda was the 3rd of his children and the only one who took to it. And she was raking earth on a smoking mound at 9 years of age and sitting the night watch at 15. And then the furnaces went out. They went out for reasons no one could argue with. Coke made better iron in bigger volume and came by rail from Pennsylvania. Lake Superior ore came cheaper than the ore in the hills. Anthracite came into every stove in New England on the same railroads, and it came clean, and it came shoveled, and a ton of it sat in a cellar bin and asked nothing of anybody. Wheelock blew out for the last time in the spring of 1896, and the stack stood there afterward in the weeds with sumac growing out of the top of it. And every one of the 11 colliers still working that district in 1890 quit inside of 4 years and went to the creameries or the brass mills at Waterbury or out west. By 1901 there was one charcoal mound still burning in Litchfield County, and it was on Corbin Hill, and the person tending it was a widow of 59 who had never in her life done anything else. The arithmetic against her was simple and public, and everybody in that township could do it, and Orange Shand did it out loud at the coal shed, whether a customer asked him to or not, because it flattered him to be the man who understood the modern world. "Look here," Shand would say, and he would take the stub of chalk he kept in his vest and draw it out on the plank door of the shed. "A ton of chestnut coal delivered to your bin is $5.75. A cord of her wood at 4 1/4, and you need a cord and a quarter of wood to do the work of a ton of coal, so call it $5.30. So far she is ahead of me by 45 cents. Now my coal comes down a chute, her wood comes to you in 4-foot sticks, and you split it, and you carry it, and you fill the box 11 times a day, and you carry out 3 times the ashes." And he had a second half to it, and the second half was the part that stung, because it was about the tax. "That woodlot of hers," Shand would say, "is 88 acres, and the town has it on the list at $1,100, and she pays $12.60 a year on it, and it brings her about $40 in a good year, and $20 in a bad one. Now if she sold the standing timber off it, she would have $300 in her hand tomorrow, and if she put it to pasture after, it would carry 12 head and pay her $30 a year forever without one stroke of work. She is paying this town $12.60 a year for the privilege of doing the hardest labor in it for nothing." He was not lying. Every figure in it was correct. That is the thing about the arithmetic that runs a township. It is almost always correct, and it is correct again the next year, and a set of numbers that comes out right every single year for 30 years does not merely become the way things are done. It becomes a kind of eyesight. After 30 years, the people inside it cannot see the shape of the thing any longer, because they are looking through it. Almeda Trescott farmed 140 acres on the shoulder of Corbin Hill, and about half of it was in grass and oats and a little corn and 11 cows, and it was farmed neither better nor worse than her neighbors farmed theirs, and about that ground nobody ever had a word to say to her. It was the 88 acres of hardwood running up the north slope behind the barn that had been an argument in that town since the second Cleveland administration. Her husband was Ansel Trescott, and he had been a teamster for the furnace before he married her, and a farmer afterward, and he died in the February of 1891 of a thing that began as a cold at 52 years of age. Her son Judson was a foreman in a hardware works at Bridgeport, and wrote at the end of every month, and a good many of those letters over the years had contained, in one arrangement of words or another, the suggestion that she sell the hill and come down. The neighbors did not write letters. They said it to her face at the store and after church and across the fence, kindly enough most of the time, because they liked her and had known her since she was a child, and a man can be genuinely fond of a woman and still consider her a fool. Almeda, sell the timber. Take the $300. Put it in the savings bank at Litchfield and draw your 4% and rest yourself. She had one answer, and she had been giving it in the same words for so long that men could say it along with her, and sometimes did, mouthing it behind her back with their hands folded. "A stick of wood wants 2 years, she said. There is no way on this earth to give a stick of wood 2 years in one afternoon. No man has ever once bought those 2 years by paying more for them." That was the public answer, and it was true as far as it went, and men heard it as an old woman's stubbornness dressed up in a sentence. There was a second answer, and only 3 people had ever heard it, and 2 of them were dead. In the second week of March, 1888, it snowed in Connecticut for 36 hours with a wind behind it, and when it stopped, the drifts on the Corbin Hill Road stood higher Then a man on a horse and the cuts on the railroad were filled level from bank to bank. No train came into Tunksbury for 9 days. On the 3rd day, the coal shed at the depot, which was then kept by Orange Shan's father, was empty, not low. Empty, with the doors slid back and nothing inside but black dust and the smell. There were 14 families on that hill road, and by the 5th day 9 of them were burning fence rails and chair rounds, and one of them was burning the siding off the north side of an empty barn, and a hill town in March is not a place where you can walk out and pick up firewood, because green wood in a snowbank does not burn, it only steams and puts your fire out. Ezra Fenn was 68 years old that March, and he had 11 ranks of 2-year-old rock maple standing behind his barn under a slab roof. He put the yoke of oxen on a stone boat, and he broke that road himself, up and down, for 6 days, and left a quarter of a cord in every dooryard on it, and when a man tried to pay him, he said he would take it in wood in the summer, and mostly they had none, and mostly he never mentioned it again. Almeda was 45 years old, and she drove the second team. Her father died 2 years afterward. Ansel died the year after that. By 1901 there was nobody left alive on that road who had been grown in the March of '88 except 2 women at the town farm and Almeda Trescott, and of the 61 men who voted against her wood, 4 had been fed out of Ezra Fenn's ricks as boys and did not know it, because a boy of 7 does not ask where the wood in the box came from. So when Almeda Trescott said that a stick of wood wants 2 years, what she was actually saying, in the compressed way that old people say things they have already thought all the way through, was that she had seen the doors of a coal shed standing open on nothing, in a month when nothing else in that valley would burn, and she had never afterward been able to make herself believe that a full bin was a permanent feature of the world. Now here's the part that nobody in Tunksbury ever looked at, because it did not look like anything at all. It looked like brush. The 88 acres behind her barn was not a forest, and it was not a woodlot in the way the word is used now. It was sprout land, and it was run on a rotation, and the rotation was 22 years long, and it had been running without a break since her father laid it out in 1854. The principle is very old, and it is nearly the only free thing in the world. Cut a hardwood stump in the winter and it does not die. It sends up sprouts out of the collar the next spring, a dozen or 20 of them, off a root system that is already 40 years old and already down in the water, and they grow at a rate no planted seedling can touch. In 22 years a good stump on a north slope will put up 3 or 4 straight poles, 8 and 10 inches through. And you cut them, and it does it again. She was cutting stumps in 1900 and one that had been cut in 1854 and again in 1876, and every one of them came back. 88 acres divided into 22 lots of 4 acres. 4 acres cut clean every winter, and never the same 4 acres again for 22 years. 22 cords to the acre in a fair lot. Better on the wet bench under the ledge, poorer up on the shoulder where the soil is a foot deep on top of rock. Call it 88 cords a year, every year, forever, off ground that grew nothing else and asked for nothing. 2 things kept the neighbors from having what she had, and only one of them was work. The first was cattle. Every other woodlot in that township was pastured. It is the natural thing to do, because a woodlot is shade and there is grass in it, and a farmer with 11 cows and a dry August will put them anywhere there is a green blade. And a cow will eat a maple sprout the way you would eat a strawberry. 40 years of cows in a woodlot leaves you with big scattered old trees, a floor of bare dirt, and not one stem of young growth. And when you cut the old trees down, nothing whatever comes back, because everything that would have come back was eaten in 1870. Almeda Trescott's 88 acres had been fenced against stock since 1854, and no animal but a deer had walked in it. 3/4 of a mile of stone wall and chestnut rail, and she walked the whole of it every April. And if you had asked the men of that town what the widow on Corbin Hill did with her time, they would have said she fooled with brush, and what she actually did One large item of it was keep a fence around 88 acres of nothing for 47 years so that a cow could not eat the next generation. The second thing was time, and time was the whole of it. Green wood does not burn. It will smolder and hiss and coat a chimney with creosote and put out about half the heat of the same stick dry, and any woman who has ever tried to get breakfast off green maple can tell you what it is worth. A 4-foot stick of hardwood cut in January, split in March, and ricked off the ground under cover with the air moving through it, is fit to burn in the second winter after. Not the first, the second. Ash, being ash, will burn the week you cut it, which is why every farm in New England had one ash tree it was saving for an emergency, and one ash tree does not get you through a February. Her father's rule, which he had off his own father, was 3 years ahead of your stove, not 1. 3. Cut this winter, sell nothing out of it until the winter after next, and keep the third year standing behind the other 2 so that you never in your life have to sell a man a stick of wood you are ashamed of. She kept that rule for 47 years, and it is the entire reason for everything that happened afterward. Because she cut her 4 acres every single winter, whether there was a market or not. The rotation makes you. If you skip a lot, it grows past cordwood size and into the awkward years where it is too big to handle and too small for lumber, and the whole 22-year clock goes out of step, and it takes a generation to put right. So she cut, and she split, and she ricked, and she sold what she could, which in the 90s was very little, and every year there was more in the ricks than went out of them. What she could not sell as wood she coaled. That is the other half of the answer, and it is the half the town had entirely forgotten was possible. Charcoal does not spoil. Cordwood in a rick begins to go punky in the 6th or 7th year and is worthless by the 10th. Charcoal in a dry shed is exactly as good in 20 years as it was the day it was drawn. So every summer she took the crooked wood, the tops, the black birch, the stuff too knotty to split and too short to sell, and burned it into charcoal in the old way and shoveled it into the 2 long sheds her father had built against the ledge, and it simply accumulated, year on year, in the dark, behind a door with a wooden button on it. And nobody in Tunksbury had the least idea how much of it was in there. She was not certain herself, within 400 bushels. A charcoal mound is not a thing you can learn out of a book, and by 1901 there was no one left in that county who could have built one but her. You clear a floor, a level circle about 30 feet across, and you sweep it and pack it hard, and the same floors get used over and over for a century until the ground under them is black 3 feet down. In the middle you set 3 poles as a chimney. Then you stand your billets on end around it, leaning in, 4-foot sticks packed as tight as a man can pack them, course on course, until you have a dome 12 or 13 feet high with maybe 30 cords of wood standing in it. Then you cover the whole of it with leaves and wet them, and shovel earth and charcoal dust over the leaves, 6 inches of it, hand-smoothed all the way round, and you leave a ring of small holes at the bottom. Then you drop fire down the center chimney and cap it. And for 7 days and 7 nights that mound is trying to become a bonfire, and your entire job is to not let it. You are cooking the wood, not burning it. Too much air, and it flames up inside, and you have 30 cords of ash. Too little, and it goes out, and you have 30 cords of half-burnt sticks worth nothing. You read it by the smoke. White and thick means water still coming out. Thin and blue means the wood is coaling. The dome settles as the wood shrinks, and you have to keep going up on it with a rake and pulling the cover tight, walking on a crust with fire 2 feet under your boots, and colliers went through that crust and were killed, and every one of them knew a man it had happened to. You do not sleep for 7 days. You doze. Her father built a little hut of poles and bark 40 feet from the floor, and she used the same hut, and she slept in it the way colliers slept, on your side facing the mound with your eyes shut and the smell doing the watching for you, and if the smell changed she was up before she was awake. She did 4 mounds a summer for most of her life. 30 cords in a mound makes something on the order of 1,200 bushels of charcoal if the collier is good and the wood is dry, and half that if either one is not. So there is the position on the 1st of September, 1902, of a woman that a whole town had voted down 11 months before. 231 cords of split hardwood, all of it 2 years seasoned, or better, ricked under slab roofs on stone sills behind the barn in 11 long ranks. Something over 4,000 bushels of charcoal in 2 sheds against the ledge. 88 acres of sprout land with a fence around it and 22 years of growth standing in it in every stage from 1 year old to 21. And no market at all for any of it, and she had made $41.60 off the whole enterprise in the previous 12 months and paid $12.60 of that back to the town in tax. The mines went out on the 12th of May, 1902. Nobody on Corbin Hill paid much attention. Anthracite strikes were a thing that happened, a thing the newspapers explained in columns nobody read past the first paragraph, and it was May. And in May, a Connecticut hill farm is not thinking about heat. The dealers had coal in their sheds. The price was steady through June. In the middle of July, the papers said the operators would not arbitrate, and the price at the depot moved from $5.75 to $6.50, and Orrin Shand told people it would be settled before the frost, and privately believed it, and so did everybody, because it always had been. It was not settled before the frost. It was not settled in August, when the price went to $8 and Shand's shed had 90 tons in it and orders on his book for 400. It was not settled in September, when the price was $14 a ton on the days you could get it at all, and the coal that came into Tunksbury came in a single car every 11 days and was gone off the siding in an afternoon. And Shand sold it in quarter-ton lots to steady customers only and lost a friend for every sale he made. And then it was the last week of September, and it turned cold at night, and a town of 1,100 people understood all at once, the way a town does, that the winter was coming on schedule and the coal was not. What happened next happened everywhere in New England that autumn, and it happened in Tunksbury with a particular kind of noise, and the noise was axes. Every man in that township went into his own woods in the first week of October, and every man in that township discovered inside of 2 days the 2 things that Almeda Trescott had known for 47 years. The first was that there was nothing in his woods to cut. 40 years of cattle had seen to it. What a man had was 11 big old rock maples he was fond of and a floor of nothing. And when he cut the 11 big maples down, which several of them did, and which is a thing that still shows on those hills, he had a great deal of wood and a woodlot that would be bare ground for the rest of his life. The second was worse, and it arrived on a Tuesday. He had cut this wood on the 6th of October and split it on the 8th and carried it into the house on the 9th, and it would not burn. It sizzled. It steamed at the ends. It blackened the glass and choked the flue and would not raise the kitchen above 60 degrees, and his wife stood in the middle of it with a cold stove in the frost already on the pumpkins, and there was not one thing money could do about it. Because what the wood wanted was 2 years, and the whole world could not get her 2 years by Thursday. Warren Ryle, the first selectman, drove up Corbin Hill on the 11th of October, 1902, with the second selectman sitting beside him, and neither of them saying anything on the way up. They had 4 schoolhouses with no fuel, and a town farm with 19 old people in it, and a coal contract with Orrin Shand that Shand could not fill at any price and had already offered to tear up. She was at the ricks when they came, with a handcart moving stove wood. Mrs. Trescott, Ryle said, and got down. She waited. "We're going to want wood for the schools," he said, "and for the farm." She looked at him for that beat too long that people found difficult, and then she said, "How much?" 30 cords if you have got it." 31. "I have got it," she said. "It is seasoned 2 years, and part of it 3. It is $9.50 the cord delivered to the door, which is what the man from Torrington offered me on Thursday, and it is the same price for the town as for him. And I will want it in writing, because the last time I stood in that hall I was voted down 61-9. Ryle said, "I know it," and took out his book and wrote it, standing at the rick, and there is no record that either of them ever spoke of it again. Orenshand came up the hill 9 days after that in his own buggy on a Sunday afternoon, which for him was the equivalent of walking barefoot to Rome. He had customers he had sold coal to for 18 years, and a shed with nothing in it, and a chalk mark on a plank door where he had been drawing the same sum for a decade. He did not make a speech. He said he would take everything she would sell and pay her price and haul it himself. And she said she would sell him 60 cords and not 1 stick more, because she had people on that hill road to think about, and he said that was fair, and she said it was not fair, it was simply what she was going to do. And gave him coffee. The wood went first. From the middle of October to the middle of December, she sold 194 cords out of 11 ranks that had taken her 3 years to build, at $9.50 the cord, and she hired Nels Bowdish and his 2 grown sons and 4 men out of Green Ledge, and there were 2 teams on that hill road from daylight to dark for 8 weeks. She sold 38 cords more standing on the stump at $4 to men who came up with axes and saws and cut it themselves off the lot she had cut in 1880 and which was 22 years old and ready, and she marked every stem for them herself so they would not butcher the stools, and she made every one of them agree to cut it low and clean, and stood over the first day of it. And then there was the charcoal. And the charcoal was the strange part, and the part that made her a small legend in that county for the rest of her life. Because charcoal, which had been a dead trade for 6 years, turned out in the autumn of 1902 to be the only fuel left in the state of Connecticut that could be had by the wagon load. The blacksmiths went first. There were 4 smiths in Tunksbury and its 2 neighboring towns, and all 4 were out of smithing coal by the 20th of October, with plow points and sled shoes and tire work backing up in their shops, and every one of their grandfathers had worked a charcoal fire, and every one of them had to be told how to bank it. Then the malleable works at Waterbury, which used charcoal in the annealing pots and in case hardening and normally bought it in carload lots out of Pennsylvania, sent a buyer up the valley in a hired rig, and the buyer was directed to Corbin Hill by 3 separate people, and stood in the door of a shed against a ledge and looked at a black mountain and asked her what she wanted for it. She sold him 1,100 bushels at 34 cents. She sold 2,240 bushels in the county itself at 28 cents to the Smiths and the creamery and the hotel at Litchfield for its ranges and its irons, and in small lots off her own back step to women who came up the hill with a grain sack and a brazier and no coal in the house, and she wrote every one of those in the book, and several she never collected. And then, in the first week of November, Dwight Petties drove into her yard with a wagon load of green red oak. He was not the first. He was the 11th or the 12th. Because somebody in that town had worked out the one thing that could be done with green wood in a hurry, and the thing was this. A charcoal mound does not care nearly as much as a stove does. It runs slower, and it yields poorly, and a collier will grumble at you about it, but wood that is only part seasoned can be cold, and what comes out of the mound is charcoal. And charcoal burns hot and clean and immediately in any grate in the county. It was the one road there was from green wood to heat, and it ran through one woman on one hill. And she was the only person left alive within 40 miles who could run a mound. So they hauled it to her. All that autumn and into December, men who had spent 10 years telling each other she was farming smoke drove up Corbin Hill with their green oak stacked on the wagon, and she burned it for them on the toll, 1 bushel and 6, which was the old furnace rate, and which she did not raise. She coaled 192 cords of other men's wood between the 1st of October and the 23rd of December in 6 mounds, one after the other, and she did not properly sleep for 11 weeks. And Nels Bowdish sat the watches she could not sit, and she checked his work anyway. Petties stood in the yard while his load came off. He looked at the mound that was burning, and he looked at the 11 ranks, and he looked at the shed with the wooden button on the door, and he said, well, she said, 3 days to build it, 7 to burn, 2 to cool, and you will get about 19 bushels to the cord out of oak that green. And that was the whole of the conversation between those two people on that subject in that lifetime. She kept the account in a school tablet on the kitchen table, in pencil, in a small slanted hand, the way she had kept it every year since 1879. This is what the tablet showed for the 12 months from the 1st of April, 1902 to the 1st of April, 1903. Seasoned cordwood off her own ricks. 194 cords at $9.50. $1,843. Charcoal of her own burning sold in the county 2,240 bushels at 28 cents. $627.20. Charcoal of her own burning sold to the works at Waterbury. 1,100 bushels at 34 cents. $374. Toll charcoal taken on other men's wood, 640 bushels at 28 cents. $179.20. Sprout wood sold standing, 38 cords at $4. $152. Wood ashes sold to the soap works at Naugatuck, 74 barrels at $1.10. $81.40. $3,256.80. To put that number where it belongs, you have to hold it up against the town it came out of. A hired man in Litchfield County in 1902 got $22 a month and his board. The first selectman was paid $110 a year. Dwight Petties, with 42 cows on the best flat land in the town, 2 hired men, a milk contract on the New York train, and a very good year for milk, cleared something near $1,900. Almeda Trescott cleared $3,256.80 off 88 acres of sprout land. 4 swept circles of black ground, a rake, a shovel, a mold, and 11 ranks of firewood that a town meeting had laughed at. The whole of the previous 10 years of that woodlot, added together, had made her $381. She paid out $690 of it to Nels Bowdish and his boys and the Green Ledge men before the middle of January, at rates that were talked about, because she paid them by the day of the strike and not by the wage of the spring, and she put $400 into a new roof on the barn and the wood sheds, which had wanted one since her husband died. And in the March of 1903 she bought 41 acres of cut-over hillside from the estate of a man who had sold every stick of standing timber off it in 1898 and died broke. And she paid $11 an acre for it. $451 for land that would not pay her 1 single cent for 22 years. She fenced it that summer. She hired the fencing done, and it cost her more than the land. Then she let it alone and let the stumps sprout. The strike was settled on the 21st of October, 1902, by a commission the president appointed, and the miners went back down on the 23rd, and the first full coal train came into Tunksbury on the 19th of November, while she still had 2 mounds burning. By February, the price at the depot was back to $7. And by the autumn of 1904 it was $5.80, and the sheds were full, and nobody in Connecticut thought about it again. Cordwood went to $5 in 1903 and to $3.50 in 1905 and stayed there. Charcoal went back to being a thing you could not sell. Every man who had gone into his woods with an axe in October of 1902 was buying coal off the siding again by the following winter, and the 11 big maples were still down, and their stumps did not sprout, because there was a cow standing on them by June. Almeda Trescott cut her 4 acres in the winter of 1903 exactly as she had in every winter before it, and split it, and ricked it, and sold almost none of it, and it took her until 1908 to build the reserve back to where it had been on the 1st of September. 1902. The Housatonic item sent a young man up the hill in the January of 1903 and ran 3/4 of a column under a heading about the wealth of the woodpile, and the piece gets her husband's name wrong and puts the acreage at 60 and says she is 70 years old, which she was not. But it has one thing in it that is hers, because it does not sound like anything a newspaper man would write, and it was her answer when he asked her how she had known what was coming. "I did not know one thing that Orange Shan did not know," she said. "He was right and I was wrong every year for 30 years, and I could not have told you why I kept on, except that a stick of wood wants 2 years, and I had got in the habit of having the 2 years. And then one October the whole town wanted to be standing where I was standing, and there was no road from where they were to where I was except straight through the 2 years, and there never is one." She died in the November of 1919 at 76, in the same room she had come to as a bride. The last mound she built was in the summer of 1916, and it was a small one, 20 cords, and Nels Bowdish did the covering. In the fuel famine of the winter of 1918, when the coal cars froze up on every siding in New England and the government shut the factories for 5 days to save fuel, there were 160 cords standing seasoned in the ranks behind her barn, and a woman of 75 sold them at $11 and gave away 9. Judson came up from Bridgeport and did not want the hill. The Bowdishes bought it in 1921, and Nels Bowdish's son kept the rotation running 4 acres a winter through the coal strike of 1922 and the whole of the Depression and the Second War, and cut his last lot in 1958 off Stump's first cut in 1854. The 41 acres she bought in 1903 came into its first cutting in 1925, 6 years after she was dead, and made 26 cords to the acre, which is the best that ground ever did. The 2 charcoal sheds fell in during the 30s. The floors are still there. You can find them on that hillside now by the color of the dirt, 4 black circles 30 feet across under 60 years of leaves, and nothing much grows on them. And the state forester who mapped that lot in the 1960s marked them as old colliers' hearths, which is the correct term and which nobody in that town had said out loud since 1896. The coal shed at the Tunksbury Depot was torn down in 1934. The depot went in 1961. The rails came up 2 years after that. 61 men sat in a town hall on a bright October evening and voted against 8 cords of firewood, and they were right about nearly every single thing they said. Coal was cleaner. Coal was steadier. Coal came shoveled and asked nothing of a man's back, and it came on a railroad that had never once failed to bring it. Every figure Orange Shan chalked on that plank door was correct. And it had been correct every year for a decade, and it went on being correct for the next 40 years after 1902. It was wrong for 11 weeks. That is all it ever needed to be. And the only person in that town still standing in the place where the wrongness landed was a collier's daughter who had watched the doors of a coal shed slide back on nothing in the March of 1888. And who had walked 3/4 of a mile of fence every April for 47 years so that a cow could not eat something that would not be cut until she was old, and who had gone up that north slope with an axe in the cold of every winter of her life and cut her 4 acres and split it and stacked it, and then walked away and let it alone for 2 years, not because she was waiting for anything, and not because she thought she was clever, but because that was the winter work, and nobody had ever given her a reason to stop.